What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, talking some college football DFS. It is Thursday, October the 21st, and we are starting to get more and more weekday games. We have a marquee 4-game slate tonight. Before we get into everything, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We will be bringing you behind the glass, showing you some of our tools, our player usage data, and we will also talk ownership, projections, everything we have available at Awesemo. So make sure to check that out for college football. Without further ado, bringing you to our player usage page, we are going to start with Tulane facing SMU. A really fun game overall. SMU still undefeated entering this contest. Perhaps they can knock off Cincinnati. We will see. But they enter this game as a 13.5-point favorite over Tulane. The total is 70 points, making this a strong target for DFS overall. On the Tulane side, they're a team that is playing fast. They are playing pass heavy. They're a team that has struggled a bit this year with just a 1-5 record, but they played some really good opponents: Oklahoma, Ole Miss, UAB, East Carolina, and Houston. And they have a dual threat quarterback in Michael Pratt. So we obviously want to take note of this. As a passer, he's only averaging 226 yards per game, but a lot of that rushing ability is somewhat mitigated by sacks taken. But in this environment, really up-tempo and pass-heavy on both sides, we want to consider Pratt, even if he's a run back to the SMU side because he's so mobile. In the backfield, they are going to use 3 backs with Cameron Carroll, Tyjae Spears, and Genio Booker. Cameron Carroll has sort of worked his way into the lead back role, but Spears and Booker are still playing a decent amount here. Enough where Carroll probably isn't a preferred play, but he did play 47 snaps to Booker's 19 and Spears 12 in their last game. So he is still the lead back for this offense. In the receiving game, Deuce Watts didn't play in Tulane's most recent game. Watch his status because he is a focal point of the offense. Deuce Watts is currently second on the team in overall, I guess I should say third on the team in overall receiving yards, and he's tied for first in targets. He is tied with their tight end Tyrick James, who is averaging 5.3 targets per game over their last 4 contests. Again, Deuce Watts has a higher target average on the year. He just missed a game in there. Tyrick James has been more of a deep threat, though. He has easily the most yards on the team. Those would be 2 preferred options. And if Deuce Watts does not see the field, Jatavian Tolles has also been a full-time player in this offense. His targets have been sporadic, but he is a full-time route runner on this team. They will use a rotation outside of that, so you'll see Fat Watts, Shea Wyatt, Jaquan Jackson even. Those players are just playing rotational snaps. If you're stacking Tulane, you're trying to stick with the Tyrick James, Deuce Watts, and Jatavian Tolles. For SMU, Tanner Mordecai is the best quarterback play on the slate. He's the safest option. He's a good dual threat, 151 yards there. He's averaging 315 pass yards per game. Tulane's defense has been brutal, allowing nearly 230 rushing yards, nearly 300 passing yards through the air. Mordecai is just a very safe option across platforms. In the run game, they now have had their buys per game over the season. Rasheed Rice is the wide receiver too. He's actually seen a little bit more targets than Danny Gray recently, 7.8 targets in their last 4 games, also averaging 64.5 receiving yards per game. Unfortunately, Reggie Roberson has basically functioned as the wide receiver 3 this year after back-to-back season-ending injuries. Just appears to have lost a step. Roberson only 5.5 targets per game, 58.5 yards. He's the most expensive and an easy fade outside of tournaments, contrarian stacks. Gray and Rasheed Rice are just more involved than Roberson at this point. Grant Calcaterra, their athletic tight end, is also heavily involved, averaging 6 targets per game over the last 4, 5.2 in the season. A little bit lower upside, but Calcaterra is certainly viable as a cheaper stacking option. And then Jordan Curley, Austin Upshaw, these guys rotate in on occasion for snaps. 2.5 targets per game for Curley in the last 4, 2.3 for Upshaw. Just GPP options. For Florida Atlantic, Charlotte, game number 2. An interesting one here. The total leaves a little bit to be desired at 57, just much, much lower than Tulane SMU. FAU is a 7-point favorite here, and they're playing much faster, and they're about balanced as far as pass to run ratio. But a lot of that comes down to FAU has been in some close games this year. They obviously played Florida, did not come away with a win there, but they also lost to Air Force, UAB. So seeing their plays per game as high as it is, even with some of those teams on the schedule, very noteworthy moving forward. They've been using N'Kosi Perry in a timeshare with Nick Tronti as quarterback. N'Kosi Perry is going to start this game. He's already been labeled the starter, but Tronti's been siphoning off a decent number of snaps every single week, enough to kind of cannibalize Perry. Either way, unless we see N'Kosi Perry play every single snap, he's going to be hard to trust with Tronti siphoning off some volume. Perry is averaging 245 yards per game through the air on 31 attempts. If he were to see all the time, I think he would be viable. But the best matchup for FAU comes in the run game against the Charlotte defense, allowing 236.5 rushing yards per game. Unfortunately, FAU uses a nasty, nasty RB committee, which will feature up to 5 players. Johnny Ford, Malcolm Davidson, Larry McCammon, James Charles, Kelvin Deem. They all play a decent number of snaps here. The snap leader is 29. That's going to be Johnny Ford. Larry McCammon was at 23 in their most recent game. So it's a rough situation. I think if you're playing any of them, you're probably trying to get to Ford. He's been the leader in touches, 13.8 per game. Outside of that, I think you try to play. It's really tough, but it's probably going to be McCammon just because he's played more than Charles Davidson and Dean recently. But McCammon, 3,900, he's easily affordable. 5.8 touches per game for him. Receiving game, LeJontay Wester and Brandon Robinson are the two clear alphas in the offense. Wester's in a tier of his own, 57.5 receiving yards per game on 7.7 targets. Robinson, 5 targets per game, just 38 yards, but he is still running far more routes than a lot of the timeshare players. They're the only two with route rates above 70%. Jaquan Burton, TJ Chase, John Mitchell all rotate in between 46 and 47% of the routes. TJ Chase has the most attractive price. If you're punting, I would go him. And then Zaire Mitchell-Payton is their seldom targeted tight end. Probably not someone to look at, but trying to get Wester, Robinson, or TJ Chase. Wish the running backs were more condensed because it's a phenomenal matchup against Charlotte, but just GPPs there. For Charlotte, Chris Reynolds, he's been a fantastic dual threat on the year, a guy that formerly rushed for over 700 yards in a season. He has 190 on the ground this year, which is fine. Through the air, he's averaging 219 on 27 attempts. Very efficient, but just a low-volume pass attack. They're much slower, and they embrace the run a little more than this FAU team. They use a two-way committee in the backfield, which is the best way to exploit FAU's defense, allowing over 237 rushing yards per game. Unfortunately, it's tough to decipher between the two. Shadrick Byrd has a slight touch advantage on Calvin Camp this year, 13.7 touches per game to Camp's 11.2. At the same time, Camp has been more efficient on the ground. So you can play either one. Their prices are nearly identical. In the receiving game, it's also a two-way committee, basically between Victor Tucker and Grant Dubose, far and away the number one, the number two. Victor Tucker has more targets on the year, but Grant Dubose has more receiving yards. He's been slightly more efficient. Their targets per game actually favor Dubose over the last 4, and Dubose is $1,000 cheaper on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Tucker is cheaper, so I think you're just prioritizing based on your platform. Dubose on DraftKings, Tucker on FanDuel. The wide receiver 3 and tight end are Taylor Thompson and Elijah Spencer. Just GPP options. They're seldom targeted in this offense behind Dubose and Tucker. Game number 3, Louisiana Lafayette taking on Arkansas State. Another 70-point total, so we obviously want to target Tulane SMU, Louisiana, Arkansas State. Arkansas State has the worst defense in the country, allowing 320 passing yards, 313.5 rushing yards per game. Lafayette just absolutely blew out Appalachian State, and this is their most, I guess I should say, easiest matchup of the entire season. Levi Lewis, his projection is propped up by matchup here. He's a guy that is only averaging 220 pass yards per game on 29 attempts, but we should see increased efficiency. He has solid mobility as well. I'm trying to get to Mordecai up there, but Levi Lewis is a solid option. In the run game, they'll use 3 backs, Chris Smith, Montrell Johnson, and Amani Bailey. They are in order. Chris Smith, number 1, Montrell 2, Amani Bailey 3. But Chris Smith and Montrell are very close in opportunities. It's 12.2 per game for Smith, 11.3 for Montrell. And then Amani Bailey sees just 8. But all 3 are heavily involved. And I think at their price points, you can play any of these 3 guys. Slight preference towards Montrell, but Bailey, Chris Smith, no qualms there. The receiving game is low volume already, and now with Lafayette, they're very difficult to target because they use a nasty timeshare. Basically, you have Kyron Lacey leading the team with a 47% route rate, only 20 targets on the year. Dante Fleming is their yardage leader, but he only has 21 targets himself, 41% route rate. And then John Stevens, Peter LeBlanc, Jalen Williams, Michael Jefferson, Errol Rogers all rotate in. LeBlanc is their former leading receiver, so if you're punting off, he would be the preferred play. In order of preference, I think you go Kyron Lacey 1, Dante Fleming 2, Peter LeBlanc 3, and then probably like a Jalen Williams, Errol Rogers. But once you get down there, it's throwing complete darts. But you obviously want pieces of this Louisiana team. The 44 implied team total makes them a strong target here. Arkansas State, you have James Blackman injured. So Lane Hatcher might finally see all of the work in this pass game. And it's an interesting spot. Lane Hatcher, if he does see all the work, could very easily backdoor his way into 300 yards through the air because Louisiana is throwing the ball 79.5. They're running 79.5 plays per game with a 69% pass rate. They're one of the pass heaviest and fastest offenses in college football with a horrific defense, so they're always in pass first mode. Lane Hatcher, somewhat mobile. He should benefit from this just based on raw attempts. He's a guy that has a very high price adjusted projection here. Love Lane Hatcher. In the run game, nasty committee. You didn't have Alan Lamar last week. We'll see if he returns. Arkansas State, they never really get a chance to run the ball at a significant rate because of how bad they are. But if you're targeting one guy, it's either Lamar or it's Lincoln Pear. He functioned as the lead back without Alan Lamar in their last game. But we're talking just really low volume running attack, not something we want to get to. But Pear 40 snaps to Johnny Lang's 11, Marcel Murray's 13. Pear is clearly the lead back without Lamar. If Lamar is back, I would expect more of a timeshare between the two. In the pass game, Corey Rucker is their top pass catcher. Easily leads the team in yards, 84 per game, targets 8.8 per game. Someone you can target with confidence. Tyviolence Hunt has reemerged as the wide receiver too. He's averaging 8 targets per game on the season, 73 yards. Confident play there. Behind them, Jeff Foreman is seeing more and more snaps go to Dahu Green and Adam Jones. But Jeff Foreman is still technically the wide receiver 3, 7.7 targets per game, 60 yards. And then Emmanuel Stevenson, their tight end. He's at 3.7 yards per game. Just once you get below Jeff Foreman, these players are seldom targeted. For reference, Emmanuel Stevenson, 3.5 targets. You have rotational players, Dahu Green and Adam Jones, averaging 4 targets per game. Even Reagan Ely's averaging 3.5 over the last 2 games. These are rotational options, but with such a high volume pass attack, they need to be considered again. That in order of preference, it's still Rucker, Hunt, Foreman, followed probably by Stevenson, then Dahu, Adam Jones, and Ely. Final game, we have San Jose State taking on UNLV. Our worst game overall in terms of total, it's just 46.5. San Jose State -5. Both teams are extremely slow. San Jose State is pass heavy, 53.9% pass rate. UNLV is balanced with a 48% pass rate. It is one of the better matchups for San Jose State this year. UNLV's primary weakness comes through the air. They're allowing 287.5 pass yards per game, but also 160 on the ground. So they're just slightly below average in both areas. UNLV is winless on the year. But as we'll get to, they've played an unbelievably difficult slate of opponents. Nick Starkel still hasn't been updated. So until further notice, we're presuming Nick Nash is still the starter. Nick Nash, former wide receiver for this team. He's very, very athletic, and he has good dual threat ability, 105 yards on the ground. Expect them to be a little run heavier under Nick Nash. At running back, Tyler Nevins and Kyrie Robinson are forming a direct committee, with Nevins playing the early down grinder role and Kyrie Robinson playing the pure pass catching role. In this offense, it's more likely that Nevins has the bigger game in this environment based on their spread, -5 in their favor and matchup. Trying to get to Nevins if playing a San Jose State back. They're both middling plays. In the receiving game, Derek Deese, their tight end, has emerged as their leading receiver. 8 targets per game is his average over the last 4, 62 yards per game. Isaiah Hamilton, Charles Roche, and Jermaine Braddock round out the wide receivers. With the injury to Nick Starkel and Nick Nash moving back to quarterback, Hamilton, Ross, and Braddock have been the very clear wide receiver 1, 2, and 3, and they're not really rotating. So a guy like Charles Ross, ton of yards, 3,500. He'd be one of the preferred punts on the slate, given his consistent role in the offense. but you could also get to Braddock, and then Isaiah Hamilton is one of the focal points of the offense, regardless of injury. So he's always in play. On the UNLV side, man, just injuries everywhere. Doug Brumfield is still injured, so we're expecting Cameron Friel to start. You ultimately could see any of Brumfield. If he plays, he'll play above Friel. But you could also see Rogers mix in, or Tate Martell, who's coming back from an injury. They're going to be more like gadget type players, but wouldn't be surprised if any of them siphoned off a few snaps from Friel. But this UNLV team, I mean, they've lost to Arizona State, Iowa State, Fresno State, UTSA, and Utah State. Just a really tough slate of games for them. In the backfield, they do have a lead back in Charles Williams. He's kind of the lone bell cow on the slate. They're only 5-point underdogs, so he's somebody that I think we could still look to. He's averaging 20.7 attempts per game, 101 yards. He's been efficient regardless, even in tough matchups here. I'm fine with Charles Williams. He's just expensive. And then in the receiving room, Kyle Williams is their clear alpha. He has 37 targets on the year. Somebody you could definitely get to. Behind him, it gets a little dicey because of injuries. That puts Steve Jenkins into the clear wide receiver 2 spot. 4.3 targets per game, just 37 yards per game. Perhaps that increases down the stretch. Kalani Mediola Jensen has emerged. He's averaging 6 targets per game over their last 2, taking on a much, much larger role without Tyleek Collins. And then Zyle Griffin is the last receiver to mention here. He's going to split time with Mendiola Jensen, but both are in play. Without Giovanni Fiolo, the tight end position is split between Shelton Zayon and Khalil Balunge. I wouldn't target either of them. It's Kyle Williams 1, Steve Jenkins 2, and then my Mendiola Jensen 3, Zyle Griffin would be 4 based on price for me. But that'll do it for the slate. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate you very much. Before we head out, leave a comment. Let me know your favorite play, and hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the channel, all that. My name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you again for watching. We will see you next time.